Welcome to Adoption Roundtable, a place to encounter the latest adoption research, policy, and practice in an accessible way. This is a space for adoptees, adoptive families, birth families, and adoption professionals. I'm Dr. Emily Helder, a clinical psychologist, researcher, and professor at Calvin University. I am also the co-editor of the Rutledge Handbook of Adoption, along with Dr. Alicia Marr and Dr. Gretchen Robel. In Season 1 of Adoption Roundtable, we'll be having conversations with the authors of chapters in the Handbook of Adoption. They are top international scholars in a diversity of fields, and together we'll talk about their work and what it means for understanding adoption. So welcome, I'm Dr. Emily Helder, and I'm here with Megan Bresnahan, who's an occupational therapist, and she works at the Adoption Medicine Clinic at the University of Minnesota. So welcome, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about your role at the Adoption Medicine Clinic. How did you end up there? What do you really find rewarding?
So my role with the Adoption Medicine Clinic is to provide support in many different ways as an occupational therapist. So my main focus is just global development skills for the kids and their families. And so helping assess where they're at with their skills and also then provide support to the families and the patients when they need some help developing some of those skills as well. Mm-hmm. That might entail us doing an evaluation or an assessment and kind of just providing education as to where the child is at. It may also then incorporate some ideas of things the family can work on at home, or maybe even recommending that the child come in for some therapy to help them with some of their skills and help provide support to the family too. So really, our role in clinic is to provide support for the patients and families in whatever way we can and is most appropriate for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been so impressed with your interdisciplinary clinic over the years as we've been adoption researchers following your work, both clinically and research-wise. So we were really thrilled when your team was available and interested to writing this chapter for us because we think you do really excellent work there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I feel very lucky and very grateful to be a part of this team just because I feel like it is very unique and very special, and we are able to provide such great support for families and patients and in whatever way that they need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So the beginning of the chapter focuses a lot on kind of giving a history of adoption trends with that special focus on adoptees with disabilities. And so I would love to hear, you've been at the clinic, is it about 15 years or so? Right. So adoption has changed a lot, even just in the last 15 years. So how do you see those trends that you described in the chapter really evidenced in your own work?
I think that I see it in my everyday work, and just the more we learn about everything, it helps us in directing what we're doing. It helps us really know how we can help and support them. So the more we learn, the more evidence that we get just really directs our care. It also helps us have a really good understanding of the child and where the child is coming from and why the child might be at a certain point in their development, or what was their history that defined some of this. And so it just helps us with that overall understanding. And the more education, the more we learn, the more we're able to incorporate that into our therapy approaches and how we're working with them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think one of the other things that we have learned just over the course of many years and the research that we have done is the importance of the early intervention. Mm-hmm. and finding that sweet spot of when the intervention is appropriate. Because when a child first comes home and they're with their family, there's a time of transition. And we want to understand and respect that time of transition and know that some things that are really important during that time is really building attachment and helping the child transition to their new home and their new family life. And so recognizing that, but also then getting therapies and interventions involved when appropriate so that we can help support them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that balance. I talked with Judy Eckerly about that a little bit as well, that balance between what's going to unfold through the developmental process of the child entering that new family versus what needs intervention. I find families have a lot of questions about how to discern what's what.
Absolutely. They do have a lot of questions about, and that's one of the ways we can help them then, is help them discern that and help provide some guidance as to, okay, when is it time to say we need to get a little bit more intervention involved?
Yeah, yeah. Another section later on in the chapter that I wanted to ask you about was the section on the multidisciplinary assessment of the child themselves. In particular, there's a great section in there on sensory challenges, and I'm assuming that's kind of where you contribute quite a bit to the clinic and the team's understanding. So, yeah, could you tell us a bit about what are some of the common sensory challenges that you see in these kids, and how you help families sort out like what sorts of behaviors are caused by sensory issues versus something else?
So what we see is for our kids, they sometimes have not had the best sensory experiences, or they may have had a lack of sensory experiences prior to their adoption. They may have just not gotten a lot of that sensory opportunity. So for example, a child may have not been held as much or rocked as much, or given as much visual. So their body doesn't learn what to do with it. And so in some cases, some kids will then learn to just do without, and they will just kind of become aversive to sensory input. Some kids will seek it out. So then when kids come home, they could be in a couple different buckets. They might be like, oh my gosh, this is great. I've got so much sensory experiences, and really just seeking it out and gravitating to it. Other kids might be more aversive and be like, I don't know what that is, and I don't feel comfortable with it, so I'm really going to be aversive to it. And we also have the kids where they don't process the input appropriately. And so they are just not having appropriate reactions. So one of the examples we use a lot is if a child had a small cut and they don't have good sensory processing skills. One child might be like, their reaction might be that you felt like they have a really deep cut that needs stitches. Another child may actually have a really deep cut and need stitches, and they don't have any response to it. So their body just has not learned how to make these good responses to sensory input. So kids can fall into lots of different categories as to what you might see, but overall, it's just that they're not processing the sensory input and making the response to it that we would think would be an adaptive response, or what the response we would expect to see.
Sure, sure. And are there behaviors that you see, I'm just thinking of common disruptive behaviors or those kind of things that your sense sometimes as the OT is that these are related to sensory sorts of challenges?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Because if you think about it, the child's just totally dysregulated because it's new sensory experiences, they don't know what to do with it, or they're feeling like they need to seek it out all the time, or they're always aversive. What's happening is this overall dysregulation. And so that poor regulation, if you don't feel good, if you feel dysregulated, that is going to contribute to behaviors. It's going to contribute to behaviors if it's something you don't feel comfortable with. And then you throw in a little bit of a language piece. So they're not able, and depending on the age of the child or where they're at with their language, they might not be able to communicate how they feel about these things. So that plays a role into it too. And so when we're helping families try to decipher, is this sensory, is it behaviors, is it transition? It just takes a lot of us kind of talking through some of the different situations to see what happened. Sure. But yeah, allowing for some time to say, okay, we need some time to see. So I may not have the best answer for you. Child's been home for a month. I may not have the best answer for you, but in 3 months, let's revisit this and see where changes you've seen. And so for a lot of our kids, we are watching too to see if parents are seeing those small incremental improvements as they're settling into their routines and their structure. And if they're seeing that, that's a really good sign to us. If they're not seeing any of that, that might be the child might be on our radar a little bit more.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Our biggest recommendation for families across the board, whether it's we're working on attachment or development or sensory, is to have lots of structure and routine in their day so that the child starts to learn that this is safe, this is secure, it's going to be the same every day, and that helps with all of those skills. So that's our biggest recommendation that we make to families as well.
Yeah.
If I have a family who are really trying to figure out, what's going on? Is this sensory? Is it behaviors? I will sometimes ask the family to just jot some notes down in like a little bit of a journal when the child has a significant behavior outburst, or when they seem really emotional or something like that, so that we can try and look into it a little bit closer to really identify what's going on.
Oh, that seems really valuable to have those in the moment notes, because maybe sometimes if it's a month later, it's hard to remember some of the context surrounding it.
And so it's interesting because some families will be telling us about an incident that happened, and I'll be like, okay, break it down for me a little bit more. Tell me what was going on. And for example, I had a mom who the child had just a complete meltdown, was very upset. And she's like, well, we had gone to Dick's right before. Dick's is a sporting goods store in our area. And I was like, well, maybe that was just too overwhelming and there was too much going on. And then the child was dysregulated and then you tried to do this. So it helps you kind of break it down so we can all be aware of what's going on.
Right, right. Yeah. And tell me a little bit about what you see as the benefits of working in the context of this interdisciplinary team model, because that's pretty unique.
Yeah, I think it just makes it a really special, unique model because we can brainstorm together. We can work through some of these things together. For example, if you're trying to decide if it's a sensory thing going on or more of a emotional health, attachment thing, I don't have to like go try and seek out all these different providers. I've got the person right there with me who we can bounce these ideas off each other. And I think it allows us to provide this really great comprehensive care for everybody involved in this collaborative approach. And so I think that's the benefit that we have with our clinic is that we're able to provide this collaborative care for our patients and their families.
Yeah. And I would think families so appreciate having kind of a one-stop shop where they don't have to navigate multiple systems to have access to all the different types of providers they might have to access.
Well, and even things as simple as, okay, there's 3 of us who want to hear about your sleep. Okay, tell us about it. So that way you don't have to repeat the thing to 3 different providers. We're all right there on the call right now or in person. And then we can all hear about the sleep. So yeah, I think it's really a very unique and a very special clinic.
Good, good. Well, and just to end, I'd love to ask you, are there resources that you share for families that you think are particularly helpful, either about sensory issues or other things as well?
Yeah, I have a lot of our own materials that we have put together over the years just to be able to provide for families. It's hard because every child is so unique. Right. So my biggest go-to that I would say is when I'm just trying to explain sensory processing to a family. And there's a series of books, and the first one's called The Out of Sync Child by Carol Stock-Kranowitz. And then she's got a series of other books as well. And that's who I probably recommend the most. Okay. The thing is that it doesn't always speak to the adoption piece, but it's good for just a good overall understanding of sensory processing.
Great, great. Thanks. And we'll provide those links for people listening or watching. So
okay.
Good, good. Well, hey, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you describing your work and how it fits in with the chapter that you wrote. Thanks also for contributing to the handbook. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us at Adoption Roundtable. Please subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. We love to hear from you and have conversations about your reactions, questions, and experiences. We'd especially appreciate feedback if you have topics or questions that we could address in future episodes. You can find me on Facebook at helder.emily and at my website, emilyhelder.com. There you can sign up for my newsletter for the latest on adoption research and practice. Thanks for joining us.